The Dallas Cowboys released their unofficial depth chart for week 1 of the preseason, and nothing says preseason better than us sitting down to break it down. So let's get to it. Do me a favor, hit the like button, share the stream, and let's get this started. Here we go. What is up, everyone, and welcome into A to Z Sports Dallas Primetime. I am your host, Mauricio Rodriguez, streaming with you live every Sunday through Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central here on Dallas On Demand Sports Talk Network. With a lot more content coming your way, make sure that you check out adcsports.com/Dallas. And as always, remember to hit that like button for me because every thumbs up puts this show in front of more and more Cowboys fans. Big show tonight as we have something to talk about, and that is the Cowboys' first depth chart of the season. Now, we should start with a disclaimer. I think that is the most sensible thing to do right now, and that is to make an emphasis on the fact that this is an unofficial, I repeat, unofficial depth chart. Should we take away definite conclusions out of it? No. But is there one or two things that we could learn about? Yes, I think so, maybe. And I have a reason behind that because even though coaches want to play the confidential games and all of that, and they want to hide stuff from the opponents, I do think they also want to light a fire under certain players or give their players the respect that they deserve by putting them where they belong, more or less, in the depth chart. So I do think there's some things to take away from today's release of the unofficial depth chart. Not to mention that there are some interesting tidbits in the pronunciation guide as well. Like, did you know Bilyami Fehoko? Well, now I don't know how to even pronounce it. Sim Fehoko and Bilyami Fehoko, we shouldn't be pronouncing Fehoko the same way for both of them. You can check out the depth chart, the unofficial depth chart, and it's got different pronunciations in it. So I thought that was interesting. But all kidding aside, welcome into the show. What we will be doing tonight is we're going to look at the offense of this depth chart, again, unofficial, and the defense. And we're going to take away some stuff. Now, when I say unofficial, it doesn't mean that it's not the Cowboys, because it is the Cowboys and it is the coaching staffs, but it's just not definite at all. That being said, I also want to start by saying my initial takeaway, and that is that when it comes to the starters and even a lot of the second teamers, the thing that I like the most about this depth chart is the fact that I don't see a lot of surprises. And I mean that in a very positive way, in the fact that the Cowboys have a lot of continuity, which is something similar to what we talked about when we discussed the defense going into year 3 of Dan Quinn's era. And it's cool to see that. It's cool to see that, there's not a lot of surprises in the starting lineup because the Cowboys are pretty much the same team that they were last year when they won 12 games, but better in the biggest changes that they had, which is at wide receiver with Brandon Cooks entering the picture and with Stephon Gilmore over on defense on the boundary cornerback position. So that is pretty fun to see. And tonight, we're going to dive into the details. Let me say hi, though, before we get into the depth chart. We've got Toxic Tommy in the room. We've got Mitesh. Toxic says we're about to only have one Fehoko anyway soon. We need to get Zach Martin back, says Gerald. Tomina15, shout out to you, sir. We've got Isaac over at Facebook. We've got Lou, Mac, Richard, Guru, Mitesh, Ron. Welcome, everyone, into the show. Happy to have you here. Happy to be talking some Cowboys football with you. Let's start with the offense, shall we? Is this the offense? All right. Yeah, there it is. You can see it on the screen. I try to make the picture as big as possible. We're going to dive into both the offense and the defense and even the special teams, which should be here, but for some reason are not in my software I'm talking about on the back end. Don't worry about any of that. I'm going to fix it. Anyways, if you go from top to bottom, and let's start with the first column, which is where you got your starters, you're not going to see a whole lot of surprises. CD is your starting number one wide receiver. Then you got Tyron, Tyler, the other Tyler, Zach Martin, and Terrence Steele as your starting offensive line. And then a couple of tight ends listed on this year's unofficial depth chart. And that is Jake Ferguson and Peyton Hendershot. And this is where it first gets interesting. It isn't anything groundbreaking, but I will say that it does confirm that suspicion that had already grown by the fact that Luke Schoonmaker, the second round pick, was not practicing due to a foot injury. That changed today, by the way, when he got back to training for the Cowboys with pads and everything. But right now, tight end number one is Jake Ferguson, and tight end number two is Peyton Hendershot. Behind them, too, is Sean McKeon, Luke Schoonmaker, and then it gets also even more interesting by the fact that John Stephens, the undrafted free agent, is above Princeton Fant, the other undrafted free agent. But John Stephens, number 49, is someone to watch because he's been turning heads in training camp, and people have enjoyed what he's brought to the table, specifically as a pass catcher, I will say. My question from me to you, though, right now, you look at that tight end group and you see Jake Ferguson and Peyton Hendershot leading the way. My question from me to you in the chat is, are you confident or not confident about Luke Schoonmaker turning it around early in the season? Let me know in the chat. Consider that he missed minicamp. He missed the start of training camp. So he is facing an uphill battle in that sense. Do you feel confident or not confident about Luke Schoonmaker climbing back up into the original conversation that he was supposed to be in, which was, battling for the starting job at tight end? It doesn't feel like it is the case anymore. I will say that Jake Ferguson is likely solidifying his spot as a starter. I wonder if it's more of a Hendershot versus Luke Schoonmaker right now. But I have some more thoughts on that before I want to get your thoughts here in the chat. Earl says, yep. Katharina goes with confident. Tom915 says, it's too early to say. Either way, Mo, confident for Lance Bell. Joel says he cannot be worse than the other two. P. Ficus says, confident, maybe not early, but if his injuries do not keep nagging, I would be confident in him having a role by week 6-ish. He looks very smooth. Toxic says, Kuhn looks like the villain in The Incredibles. What is the name of that guy? I know exactly who you're talking about. Troy says, Kuhn and Martin will get this run game going. Travis is concerned based on our lack of second-round wins in the draft. And from what I can see, we've got about a 50-50 split right now going on in the chat. Here's where I'm at. I'm going to say not confident if we're talking about the number one role. I don't see Schoonmaker really bouncing back from that missed time in the offseason because I do think it's very, very important. I do think we shouldn't overlook that at all. And just historically, rookies that miss so much of the offseason struggle a little bit. So I think that Jake Ferguson is pretty well in place at tight end one, but I would be pretty confident in him carving out a role quickly and becoming tight end two, or not even that. Here's why, and this is what I wanted to get to. Hendershot has been getting a lot of reps with the first team in practice based on what we've seen, both from reporters and what we saw on Saturday when they live streamed the practice and all of that. Seems to me like the way that Hendershot is being used right now by the Cowboys is mostly as this F-type tight end. Like they're trying to get him out in routes. They're having him separated from the line. They're having him work as pretty much a receiver, a receiving tight end. And I think that Schoonmaker could carve out a different type of role with the Cowboys because we know that they want to get him involved in run blocking, right? That's what probably attracted the Cowboys to Luke Schoonmaker so early in the draft was the fact that he was this very well-rounded out athlete who could block and who was willing to block in Michigan with the Wolverines. So could they really feature this 12 personnel group that they want to feature, but also have that heavy rotation of what you want to do with your tight ends? And obviously, that doesn't work if they are one dimensional. Like if all Hendershot does is go out there and run routes like a regular receiver without getting his hands dirty in the blocking world, then you lose a lot because you need to be that kind of versatile player to keep the offense unpredictable. And, we talk about, oh, this is a blocking tight end, this is a receiving tight end. At the end of the day, you have to do a little bit of everything to work in the NFL. But I do wonder if they say that they carry 4 tight ends. Is it Hendershot and Schoonmaker maybe can rise quickly because of what he can bring to the table in the run blocking world? I think so. But I also notice that the Cowboys seem to like Hendershot a lot based on what we've seen so far in training camp. I would call him one of the biggest winners so far from camp. And that also has to do with Schoon's injury itself, because that injury has allowed Hendershot to spend a lot of time with the ones and with the twos too. Tom915 says, is he healthy now? He did practice today. It feels like he's going to be in this ramp up period, which is what McCarthy said. And we'll see if he plays on Saturday versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. But he is back to practice. Yes, sir. His workload, we'll see how it all goes this week. But it does sound like he is practicing and getting ready for action at a 100% rate down the road. The blocking, yes, is Lance. Hendershot seems to be on the move tight end in the pass game, average inline blocker. Luke Syndrome, Schoonmaker. Oh, that's right. That is the name of the Incredibles villain. That is true. Guru says we are carrying 4 tight ends: Ferguson, Hendershot, Schoon, and McKeon. That's where it gets even more interesting. Sean McKeon listed as a second teamer as well. Those would be your 4 tight ends, your top 4 tight ends. But also, you've got John Stephens, the undrafted free agent, and Princeton Fant making some noise. John Stephens more than anyone else, I would say. I will say this. I'm not very high on the possibility of him making the roster as a surprise member of the 53-man roster. I would love for it to happen. I'm all for underdogs. I'm all for undrafted free agents. Tight end is a difficult position to make it in, though, because you're carrying 4 at the most. That's your maximum tight ends that you're going to carry on the 53-man roster. Does he take the spot of Sean McKeon? He's not taking Ferguson's, he's not taking Hendershots, and he's not taking Schoonmakers. Those 3 guys are locks. And Sean McKeon is interesting because we know that the Cowboys like him. He's been in the team for years now. Do you move on from him to carry John Stephens, who is turning heads in practice as a pass catcher, but maybe he's not the finished product that you would want on the field today? Whereas with McKeon, you would just feel a lot more comfortable, I would say. So feels to me like John Stephens is a lock for, say, the practice squad, but it's not going to be easy to keep him on the roster, even though he is making a lot of noise in training camp, and it won't be easy for the coaching staff. It just won't be easy to move on from him because apparently he's been one of the biggest surprises in Oxnard. It will be fun to watch. Cowman says, man, John Stephens creates mismatches. And that's what the Cowboys could be looking at right there. He is huge. He is fast. Like, we've seen him multiple times generate a lot of separation in camp. I was watching Saturday's practice, the one that they live streamed, and he's just running this crossing route, and he is completely alone. I don't even remember who was supposed to be on him, and it was a backup player, like it wasn't a starter or anything like that. But yeah, John Stephens is out there making some plays and proving that he can generate that separation. So looking forward to seeing how that plays out for the Cowboys. Anyways, wide receiver. Moving on here on the depth chart, after the tight ends, you've got the other wideouts. Brandon Cooks, Michael Gallup as the starters. No surprise there. But do look at the second teamers, and you've got Fehoko at the top of the list on the second column. And then the other second teamers are Cavante Turpin and Jalen Tolbert. I think that's, again, just confirmation of what many of us already thought. The fact that these three would be above the undrafted free agents, Dennis Houston, and all of them, that is subject to change over the next few weeks before cut down day on August 29th. But man, out of Fehoko, Jalen Tolbert, and Cavante Turpin, which was supposed to be that intense roster battle to determine how the depth chart looked after the starters, it's been made a little bit clear that Turpin and Tolbert have the early lead. Tolbert is getting a lot of reps with the first team. He's looking like a legit wide receiver, and I'm happy to eat crow about it because I was a skeptic. I have been a skeptic pretty much all offseason about Cavante Turpin as a wide receiver, not as a returner, as a wide receiver. At least the coaching staff seems to be all in on that project. And I'm betting they're hoping that he's wide receiver number 5, maybe based on what we've seen. I think that we would have to make Tolbert number 4 because he's also had a pretty cool training camp. Again, this is based on the clips that we've seen, based on what the insiders are saying, what the coaches and players are saying in press conferences. Obviously, I'm not Derry Oxnard, so that's limited. And Fehoko would probably be the odd man out. Like if they asked you to vote for who's number 6 out of those 3 guys, you would have to say Simi Fehoko. And that is tough to say after the fact that we thought he was this guy on the rise entering training camp. Obviously, the injury also had him missing several practices, but doesn't sound like we've heard a lot of good stuff from Fehoko like we have from Turpin and from Tolbert. And Joel says Tolbert is trash. I'll say this, he hasn't been trash in training camp. Say what you want about his rookie season. And yes, based on the expectations that we had for him, his rookie season might have been labeled as such because he was a healthy scratch for so many games, because he was the one responsible for the offside call versus the Green Bay Packers late in the game. All of that we can talk about. Himself, he has talked about how bad of a rookie year it was and how he's trying to turn things around. But he's been good. He's been good in training camp so far, so that's cool. Anyways, one more takeaway from the offense. I mean, QB is not much to talk about. Dak Prescott, Cooper Rush, Will Grier. Running backs. Boy, oh boy. You've got Pollard as your starter, and then running back 2. Running back 2 is not Malik Davis. It's Rika Dowdle. And we've talked about this before here on the show, but Mike McCarthy kind of hinted at this several times now. The first time it happened early in the offseason. And keep in mind, Rika Dowdle did make the roster over Malik Davis last year, but he got hurt in week 5, and that's when Davis entered the picture. Mike McCarthy, back in the offseason, like in phase 3 of the offseason, he said, hey, don't forget about Rika Dowdle. That's what he said, Mike McCarthy himself. I think he was asked about Malik Davis, and he was like, "Don't forget about Rico. He did good stuff for us. Got hurt. Blah blah blah." Fast forward to training camp, he's asked about the running backs, and he says, "I'll tell you what. I love Rico. I love what Rico is doing." That was first comment out of his mouth, and then he talked about Malik Davis taking a jump, etc. But man, McCarthy, based on the way that he's talked about the running back position, does seem like Rico is your number two right now. And I would say he had been hinting at it since May or June. I don't remember exactly when that comment took place, but I'm guessing it was June. Now we see the unofficial depth chart. We see Rico Dowdle on it, Malik Davis as a number 3, and then Ronald Jones is in there as the number 4. Wouldn't make too much out of that, though, since the other guys are rookies, and usually the rookies are listed below the veterans for obvious reasons. But yeah, Deuce Vaughn, Hunter Lipke in there. Rojo, however, dealing with a groin injury, facing a 2-game suspension. I am not optimistic about Rojo's chances at the 53-man roster, even after his suspension is done. I wouldn't dismiss the possibility of the Cowboys just moving on from Rojo, even if he wasn't suspended. So something to watch there for sure. But if I were putting together a projection today, Rico Dowdle would be my number 2 running back. Let's see what you guys have to say, though, in the chat. Uncle Rico says something I wanted 5. Yeah, I'm good with all of us calling him Uncle Rico. Earl says, I like Vaughn. Let's see here. As soon as there is tackling in real games, down goes Rico. Gerald says Mike McCarthy is a joke as a head coach. Is he, though? Is he? Hasn't he had back-to-back 12-win seasons for the Cowboys? I'm not sure if he's a joke. We can have a conversation about whether or not he's in the hot seat. We can have a conversation about the time management and other stuff. But joke is a pretty strong word, in my opinion, for somebody who has had back-to-back 12-win seasons and a playoff win. Even if the Cowboys had not made it to the NFC Championship game, the Cowboys did win a playoff game last year on the road. I struggle. I struggle with that. I mean, it was the NFC East too last year, and it was one of the best divisions in football. And it is expected to be one of the best divisions again in 2023. So, I don't know. I do struggle with calling McCarthy a joke as a head coach. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't, personally. Defense is going to be crazy, says TJ. Joel says, how's Mike McCarthy going to call plays when he can't manage the clock? I do wish that the new analytics department stuff and how they have revamped it really translates into somebody helping McCarthy with the game management stuff, because that's been an issue in many ways, not just in terms of the clock, in terms of fourth down decision making, among other stuff. Hopefully McCarthy gets some help there. I think he will, based on the news around the analytics department team. How long will it take? That's another question too worth asking, because teams have put together pretty good analytical teams just for the coaching staff to not really buy into it. Looking forward to seeing how quick that process is for McCarthy and the Cowboys in 2023. Anyways, that's the offense. Let's move on to the defense depth chart. Not a lot of takeaways here. And this is part of what I meant with I'm excited about the fact that there's not a lot of changes here. There's just not. If we go through the starting lineups, you've got DeMarcus Lawrence as a defensive end, Dorrance Armstrong opposite of him, because they do list Micah as a linebacker. And that's a gray area, because sure, we can call them defensive ends, we can call them linebackers. At the end of the day, Micah Parsons is an edge rusher who can do more stuff, but pretty much all of the time, he's going to be rushing the passer off of the edge. So you can think of Dorrance Armstrong as your starting defensive end, and that would be fair considering how crazy Dan Quinn's defensive fronts can get. but Micah is your edge rusher if you use that language. Interior defensive lineman would be Jonathan Hankins and Oza Odigisuwa. Not a surprise to me that Massey Smith is listed as a second string player. Hankins is the veteran. He has had a good camp as well. And Massey, as a first round rookie, might take a few weeks to really establish himself as the starting nose tackle of the team. And then you go through the rest of the lineup, and you've got Leighton Van Der Esch, you've got Stephon Gilmore, Trayvon Diggs. Starting nickelback is Daron Bland. And your three safeties, which I absolutely love that the Cowboys list three safeties in their unofficial depth chart. You've got Donovan Wilson, Jaron Kears, and Malik Hooker. No surprises there. Even looking at the second teamers, I will say I'm not surprised about a whole lot of stuff. You've got Sam Williams and Dante Fowler as the quote unquote backups. Damone Clark, who we know is going to technically be the starting off-ball linebacker, but in this case, Micah is listed as a linebacker. Sam Williams, Neville Gallimore, Massey, Jabril Cox behind Leighton Van Der Esch. I think the one surprise that I would point towards is Eric Scott Jr. being listed as a second teamer, but not that specifically, rather seeing Miles Brook below CJ Goodwin on defense and having him in between him, Miles Brooks, and Eric Scott. That to me tells me the coaching staff really does look at Eric Scott as a likely member of the 53-man roster, while many people thought that, hey, maybe Miles Brooks can do his thing and can be one of those UDFAs that forces a drafted rookie off of the roster. Could happen. It has happened before. But in this case, I do think that the coaching staff is sending a message there to have CJ Goodwin in between Eric Scott and Miles Brooks. That's just me. And Sean Wright, second teamer, Kelvin Joseph as the backup nickel cornerback, and then you've got D'Angelo Mandel behind him, and then Jordan Lewis at the bottom of the depth chart. That has to do a lot with health and the fact that Jordan Lewis has not been around for the entire offseason, and that's one of the top veterans that is in danger of losing a roster spot. Jordan Lewis, in my opinion, if healthy, could still be your desired backup nickelback behind Daron Bland. Like, just have Jordan Lewis, who's done it before, who has started multiple games before in that situation, have him over Kelvin Joseph. But it's tough to really know for sure since he hasn't been around for a while now. Like, he got injured in that Detroit Lions game. We have not seen him since. It was a serious injury, so you just don't know how he will return. We are days away from the preseason, and he has not practiced. So it's not good. It's not good for Jordan Lewis. I think it's one of those guys that you will still want to carry on an injured list and have him start the season like that if you needed to. But Jordan Lewis, one of those interesting wild cards to follow deep into the season. And then Israel Mukwamu also in there as the backup safety with Marquise Bell and Juan J. Thomas, with Tyler Coyle all the way at the bottom with Sheldrick Redwine. We saw Tyler Coyle absolutely blast. I think it was John Stephens, but I'm not sure, on Saturday's practice, which was live streamed. And the crew that was commentating the practice was like, hey, Coyle is frustrated, right? He wants to make that big play to stand out because he's buried in a very deep group of safeties. And his path to the 53-man roster is very foggy. Like, you need a lot of imagination to see Tyler Coyle making it to the roster just because the Cowboys have so many safeties. Let's see what you guys have to say, though, in the chat about the defense. Is there something, anything that surprises you in there? I'm going to throw up the defense again on the screen for you to see it. and maybe share anything that surprises you. In the meantime, I'm going to read some of your comments. Let's see here. Dominic says Overshown is making the second team this year. He's not a third string guy. I promise you. And yeah, like I will say this, Overshown pretty much is a second string linebacker, even in this depth chart. Like if you look at it closely, again, Micah listed with the linebackers, the guy is not a linebacker. Like we just know that he isn't. Dan Quinn calls him a pass rushing linebacker, and that is fine. They can call him whatever they want to call him within their own scheme. But if you look at it from a universal language, Micah is an edge rusher first and foremost. That's what he will do in the vast majority of his snaps. So if you kind of ignore the fact that Parsons is listed as a linebacker there and you push Damone Clark up to the first team, which he is likely to be the starting off-ball linebacker alongside Leighton Vander Esch, you could see the Marvin Overshown also being pushed up one spot and have him be the second teamer, basically, because that's a thin unit too. And the coaching staff is reportedly very in love with the Marvin Overshown, and they have liked what he has done over in the preseason. Lance says DA will be traded. Man, I don't see it. I have never seen it. I know some way, somehow, this became a thing. I'm not sure why. I think it was maybe one of those things that somebody kind of proposed it and it took a life of its own. I don't see Armstrong being traded, man. Dan Quinn likes Armstrong. We have seen that over the last couple of years. We talk a lot about how Parsons can do pretty much anything that they ask him to do. And I'm not comparing in any world Dorrance Armstrong to Micah, but he's pretty versatile for Dan Quinn as well. Like he will be mucked up over the A gap. He will be dropping into coverage in random plays. He will be rushing from a 2-point stance, like 2 yards deep or 3 yards deep. He will be doing these hybrid type things that Dan Quinn likes. And maybe we don't talk about that enough. I do not see Armstrong being traded at all. I don't know how that started, but I've seen a lot of comments about it. I can tell you, DA is not getting traded. He is not getting traded. Period. You can take that to the bank. You can. Also, think about how much Dan Quinn enjoys just filling the defensive line with defensive ends. Third and long, NASCAR front. We'll get Parsons, Lawrence, Fowler, and Armstrong in there. Or swap out Fowler or Armstrong for Sam Williams in 2023. We'll see a lot of that. A whole lot of that. And I love it personally. Bohanna stays is Troy. And that is gonna be a fun one to see how it plays out. You look at the depth chart right now, and you've got a defensive tackle. Your two starters are Hankins and Oza, right? Second team, Massey and Neville Gallimore, and that's nose tackle and 3 technique. And then, as a third string players, you have Quinton Bohanna at nose tackle, who is absolutely huge right now, and Chauncey Golston as your 3 technique. And all the way in the bottom, it's my guy, Isaac Alarcon. Would love to see him higher, but you know how it goes. Anyways, Bohanna has a tough road to the 53. I'm really intrigued to seeing how that plays out. That's nothing against Bohanna. It's just, he's not beating Hankins and Massey. We know that. Nobody's going to question that. So it becomes a conversation of, do the Cowboys carry 3 nose tackles? And to do that, you probably have to carry 3 defensive tackles. Now, Fehoko here is listed as a defensive end, but we had heard about the Cowboys potentially looking at him as an inside guy. I'm not entirely sure what Fehoko's deal is going to be. We have not heard a lot about him from training camp, I think, or at least that's been my perception. So if you carry 3 defensive tackles and you don't count Fehoko as one, I could see him being there. I could see him being there, Bohana. But it's going to be a tough ask. It is going to be a tough ask. How many defensive linemen total are you going to carry? Is it going to be 10 of them? Is it going to be 11 of them? It's going to be a difficult task to get all the defensive linemen that you want on the roster. I'm pretty excited to seeing how that plays out. I wouldn't dismiss the possibility of the Cowboys moving on from Gallimore, even. It's going to be fun. Like, Toxic says, I would keep Gallimore over Bo as of right now. I think I did that in my last projection. And the logic there is you're just looking at the body types. I've got 2 nose tackles. Do I need a third one? Whereas with Gallimore, you're probably asking if Gallimore is your third 3 technique or your second. Because you've got Oza, you've got Golston, who's doing a good job as well. It's not easy. It's not easy to really set up your defensive line. The Cowboys did have this very cool moment in practice where they had this defensive line made up of Masi, Hankins, and Bohana. And seeing that on game day would be pretty cool. You know, that huge, big time defensive package would be pretty fun. So that's the defense. And then last but not least, to close the show out, this is your special teams. As you can see at the kicker position, talked about this a little bit last night. Now it's official. Brandon Aubrey, first team kicker, and second team kicker, no such thing. The Cowboys released Tristan Vizcaino on Monday after early struggles in training camp. They asked McCarthy about it. The answer naturally was, we want to get Brandon as many reps as possible. Jerry Jones said that they are comfortable with Brandon Aubrey. I don't know how you would be necessary. I don't know how comfortable is a word that Jerry Jones came up with, but he did. Brandon Aubrey is something like 26 of 35, or he was at least before Monday. So it's also been up and down for Brandon Aubrey. For those of you who are not familiar with him, it might be because he started playing football in 2022. Before that, he played football. He was a soccer player, first round draft pick for Major League Soccer, moved on to football in 2022, played 2 seasons with the Birmingham Stallions. He was the All-USFL, 2-time champion there. So experienced, but also not really, right? And then you got a punter, Brian Anger, which is important because if you want to bring in someone like Ravi Gould, like we have talked about before here on the show, you're talking about a guy who cannot kick off the football. So then, or at least hasn't. I'm not going to say that he can't do it because I don't know if he can do it in this day and age, but we know that he hasn't. As of late in his career, he has not handled kickoff duties. Brian Anger, throughout his career, has also not done that. So then what do? You bring in Ravi Gould and then you have somebody else that it's not even a kicker maybe handle kickoffs? I don't think so. Do you carry 3 kickers, including the punter that is, on your team? I don't think so either. So it's not easy. It's not easy to solve that problem that the Cowboys have right now. Long snapper, it's going to be Trent Sieg, Brian Anger, the holder, kick returner, and punt returner, Kavontae Turpin. One thing to note is at punt return, you've got Deuce Vaughn as your second teamer. And then at kick return, you've got Malik Davis as your second teamer. I don't know if this helps Malik Davis's case to make the roster when the cuts are all done, because you might already have Deuce Vaughn helping out in that department. And I don't say this to say that Malik Davis is not worthy of a 53-man roster, but it's a numbers game. So if you want Deuce Vaughn, Hunter Lipke, because of their body types on the roster, and you got Rico as the number 2 and Pollard as the number 1, is there a space for Malik? Gonna be pretty tough. Cut down day will be. And, injuries happen, so it's not going to be as clean as it looks like right now. So some of these decisions will be made automatically, to put it one way, knock on wood, we're not wishing injuries on anybody, but they do happen pretty much every year. So statistically speaking, it's just likely that some of these decisions will be made by injuries. I'm not trying to jinx anybody, I promise. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, before we get out of here, let me read some of your comments here. Time to bring back Maher again, says Tommy915. We tried. Here on Primetime, we tried to make that happen. Didn't. He's a Denver Bronco now. Who? Those shows make sense now. The ones where we talked about drafting a kicker in the 4th round only before they were drafted in the 3rd round. Now it makes sense. Now it makes sense. Lance says, just hate to depend on my kicker to make a quote-unquote makeable kick. Bring back Dan Bailey. Troy says, letting Maher go was silly. Isidro says, Schoon has superior physical traits and a big ceiling, but he was hurt in college, hurt in camp, and he's older to boot. We shall see. Yeah, Schoon is going to be quite the study case. Toxic says Dallas already did that with Nick Folk and Davies Bueller, not to spoil the ending, but it didn't work. Lance says Schoon is huge and DV is small. Small. Tommy915 says, what you sipping on, Bo? Plain old water. It's crazy hot where I live in. It's crazy hot. I mean, I'm guessing it's pretty similar to Texas, to be honest, right now. But yeah. Mo Bun is the second running back, and Sam Williams should start this year, says Gregory. Oh, man, in place of who, though? Man, it's just Dan Quinn's defense is so blurry that, like, I think of the edge rushers as Micah and Lawrence, and then pretty much at any moment they can be on the same side of the defensive line with somebody else in it. I love Dan Quinn's defense because of exactly that. Tommy915 says, just lie and say tequila, Mo. In my early live streaming days, and I'm talking about like 2017, I took a sip from a cup, and somebody told me in the comments, what are you drinking? Like, just the same thing that just happened right now. And I, kind of like having a momentary brain fart, as they call them, I try to show them, hey, man, it's not tequila, it's not beer, it's water. And I try to show the cup. And then I just poured water into my PC. I'm not even joking. The clip is somewhere on Twitter. Good luck finding it. I'm not about to show you it. And yeah, that was one of my career bloopers, early career bloopers. Ladies and gentlemen, that will be it for me tonight here on the show. Do me a favor, hit the like button for me, because every thumbs up puts this show in front of more and more Cowboys fans. We are live every Sunday through Thursday night at 8 p.m. Central, so make sure you tune in tomorrow night as well, when we've got the one cool thing, and man, I already know what mine is gonna be. So I'll see you el día de mañana. Muchísimas gracias. Bye-bye.